We are excited to welcome you to this webinar about the IFR4 NPO project to be run this day in Ethiopia. So what is IFR4 NPO? IFR4 NPO is International Financial Reporting for Non-Profit Organizations. My name is Meti Busha, and the meeting is hosted by AGA, and we are glad to be collaborating with IFR4 NPO as country champions to ensure stakeholders are aware of the project and encourage you to participate. We are also joined by Samantha Musake, who is the IFR4 NPO Project Director for Humantam. So this event is a meeting rather than a training webinar. Although we will be online rather than in person, we have built in time for small group discussions and use of chat function to encourage interaction, discussion, and feedback. We will have 2 hours altogether, as you can see. There are 2 blocks of short presentations, which is the background about the project and the consultation process, but with a small group discussion and feedback in between. You might be wondering, why do we have a picture of NPO activity in the background, as you can see from the background? As we discuss issues of financial reporting for NPOs, we would like to keep in mind that NPO financial reports have little meaning apart from the context of great work that NPOs do around the world and also here in Ethiopia, around areas of health, social service, education and research, environmental protection, development aid, advocacy, religion, culture, recreation, and more. So to manage our meeting through Zoom virtually today, here are a few Zoom tips to help the meeting run smoothly. For most of the meeting, you will probably find speaker view more helpful than gallery view. But when we break into smaller groups, gallery view will be better. There is control panel that needs to enable you to mute or unmute your microphone, start or stop your video, and type into the chat. To make the control panel visible on mobile, swipe or tap the screen. On laptop, hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen and the control panel should appear. In general, please keep your microphone off unless you're speaking. Do keep your video off during the presentation. But during the small group time, it will be important to turn your video on, if you can, to enable a meaningful discussion. Okay? So please do feel free to type a comment or a question in the chat at any time. This can be directed to the host only or to everyone as appropriate. When we report back from the small group session, it might be helpful to use the raise hand function if you are a nominated spokesperson, ready to share some feedback from your group. So raise your hand, you can click on participant in the control panel, and from there, you see a button to raise to lower your hand. So before we get started, let's find out who have with us today. First of all, I'm glad to welcome Mrs. Hikmat from ABE, Auditing and Accounting Board of Ethiopia, and who is from regulating body of this reporting and accounting in Ethiopia, who is here with us today and who will also take us through. Please could everyone here take a moment to introduce. So can you please introduce yourself in the chat? You can put your name, your role, and your organization. Thank you. While you keep on putting your name, your role, and your organization, we will continue the presentation. Thank you so much. So, to continue with the presentation, we will continue with Samantha Musake from Humantum. So, Samantha, thank you, and you can continue.
Okay, good morning. Thank you so much, Meti. Thank you for that, for bringing us into this meeting, for welcoming us all. Allow me to introduce myself a little bit. So my name is Sam or Samantha Musoke. I'm a UK chartered accountant. I qualified in 2000 with Mazars. I'm specialized in charity audits. I moved to Uganda in 2001, and I've been living in Uganda for the past 20 odd years. I've had various roles in the non-profit sector, been an auditor, a CFO, a grant management advisor, a board member and a treasurer, and I've also done lots of training and consultancy assignments across Africa. I've been an associate with Humantum since 2004 and became the regional director for East Africa in 2017 before I took on as project director for IFR for NPO in 2019. So that's a bit about who I am, just so that you have some background about me. So we're going to start this meeting with 20 minutes or so, just introducing you to the IFR for NPO project. Apologies if you are already familiar with it, but it is helpful just to have a quick reminder and make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to the later parts of the meeting. So first, we're going to see a video.
IFR for NPO is a 5-year initiative to develop the first ever internationally applicable financial reporting guidance for non-profit organisations. It's coordinated by Humantum and the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. You probably know that businesses have international financial reporting standards, and governments have international public sector accounting standards. But the not-for-profit sector has no equivalent. This undermines the consistency and usefulness of financial reports and ultimately harms the sense of trust and accountability that is so central to its effectiveness. The current system is also inefficient, with duplication of effort for both NPO and funders in meeting multiple and at times conflicting financial requirements. An academic study in 2014 received responses from 179 countries. 72% of respondents agreed that an international standard for NPOs would be useful. So, the IFR for NPO project is answering this call. By engaging a wide range of stakeholders, the new guidance will command support from the accounting community and NPOs, as well as those that fund and regulate them. The guidance is being developed in a technically rigorous 3-step process, involving a consultation phase and development of an exposure draft, with final guidance available from early 2025. With the goal that at least 10 countries will use the guidance by 2030, with more to follow. The project has a technical advisory group involving national standard setters from every continent and an official observer from the International Accounting Standards Board. And the practitioner advisory group helps us ensure the guidance will meet users' needs. The founding funders share our vision for this game-changing project. We have the opportunity of a generation. We can increase accountability and transparency while reducing inefficiency in the current system.
Super. So I hope that video has given you a sense of just how important and exciting this project is. One question that often arises is which types of NPO financial reports is this project developing guidance for? I also maybe should mention that when we say NPO, we mean NGOs, but also many other different types of non-profit organizations. So it could include NGOs, but also churches or religious organizations or hospitals or clinics that are set up on a not-for-profit basis, or universities. So it really includes a broad range of organizations. So if we think about all the transactions of an NPO should be entered into their accounting system, which classifies and summarizes those transactions to produce various financial reports. Some reports are for internal use by managers and board, but then when an NPO implements donor-funded projects, they're often required to produce special purpose reports, specifically for that donor and about that project. And those donor reports may or may not be audited. But then every year, the organization should produce its annual audited accounts, which are also known as general purpose financial statements. So these are the ones that you would file with the regulatory body, and they're just designed to meet the needs of a broad range of users. Now, the IFR for NPO project is focusing specifically on these general purpose financial statements and the accompanying narrative reports that tell the story about what the organization has been doing. Now, of course, these different types of reports are connected because they're created from the same source transactions, or at least some of them, and the same accounting system. So for that reason, Humentum is also working on another project to harmonize donor project reporting formats. That project, however, is different to this one. The two projects are complementary, the two projects are important, but the project that we're talking about today, the IFR for NPO project, is focusing on the year-end annual audited accounts and the way that they're presented. It's fair to say that the other projects, which are looking at donor report harmonization, are in some ways waiting for this project to make some decisions and get a little bit further along before they're able to progress very much further. So these two projects are different, complementary, and both very, very important and impactful for our sector. Which stakeholders are being considered in this project? So we're really responding to the challenges expressed by three broad groups of stakeholders. The first group are the users or the readers of financial statements. So if we think about these general purpose financial reports, they're supposed to meet the need of a range of users. This would include donors, but also regulators, service users, which might be beneficiaries or clients, depending on your context, and the public, as well as banks. If you want to open a new bank account, you probably will have to give your audited financial statements to the bank. Collaborating partners, if you're working together on projects, suppliers, if they want to see your creditworthiness, and staff, if they're looking to see what kind of organization they're working for. So within this group of users, large donors are particularly influential, as we just discussed, because if the requirements of the IFR for NPO guidance sort of conflict with donor reporting requirements, that could cause problems for NPOs. At the same time, donors themselves are users of the general purpose financial statements. They want to understand the organization as a whole. They want to see the context for the projects that they are funding. So they're users of both types of financial report. So for that reason, we are engaging with donors in a donor reference group, just really acknowledging what an important group that is in terms of influencing the users, influencing the preparers and the accounting systems of their grantees. So the second important group of stakeholders are those who prepare the financial statements, i.e. the non-profit organizations themselves. And it's important to note that any benefits to users need to be balanced with cost to preparers. There's sometimes a cost of an effort cost of putting in to prepare financial statements in a certain way. Are those costs worth it for the benefits to the users? And there's a balancing act there for any accounting standard setter to consider those different stakeholders. Then the third group of stakeholders is the auditors. Obviously, auditors provide assurance about whether the financial statements present a true and fair view. They're often at the front line of supporting NPOs to implement and apply applicable accounting standard guidance. So they're a very important group of stakeholders for this project. In Uganda, where I live, I have seen examples of audit reports which say these accounts give a true and fair view, but instead of saying in accordance with IFRS or IPSAS or something, they just don't say anything because there's for them specifically relevant for them to refer to. And that's a problem in any country that doesn't have its own national guidance that's really specific for non-profit organizations. Now, it's important to say that as a project, we don't represent any one particular group of stakeholders. Our desire is to balance the needs of different stakeholders and make sure we get guidance that's really fit for purpose and meets the needs of the sector as a whole. So what will this project actually deliver? What change are we trying to bring about? So if we look at some of the current problems around financial reporting in the sector, many of the challenges expressed by stakeholders stem from this core problem that there is no internationally applicable standard for how non-profits prepare their annual financial statements. So where countries don't have their own national standards, this can lead to inconsistency even within the same jurisdiction. So I think there are about 20 countries, for example, the UK, the US, Canada, New Zealand, Sierra Leone, Colombia. There are others. There are about 20 countries, even India and Japan, that have their own national standards that are written specifically for non-profit organizations. But other countries like Ethiopia, which has adopted IPSAS, which is written for governments, or Uganda, which asks non-profits to use IFRS, which are written for for-profit companies, there are gaps in being able to interpret and apply that guidance in our context. So that leads to inconsistency even within the same country sometimes. For larger international NPOs that have offices in many countries, they might need to consolidate all those to make one big financial report for their headquarters, but inconsistency between countries makes consolidation difficult and expensive. And sometimes we end up with lots of Excel spreadsheets or keeping sort of two sets of books, one to please the head office, one to please the donors. And that's not the professional place that we want to be as a sector. Now, when funders look at the financial statements of potential grantees, they sometimes find it hard to assess financial capability or understand the wider context for a particular project. And because it's hard for funders to find the information they need or get the confidence that they need, it results in expensive and often duplicative processes for due diligence, financial reporting, and auditing. We might find the same transactions being audited by a donor auditor and the same ones being audited by your organization auditor. It's real double work and duplication. We might find with due diligence as well that one donor comes in and does an assessment, and then another donor comes in and does an assessment, and they're looking at very, very similar things. Now, obviously, due diligence includes much more than just looking at financial statements, but it is an important cornerstone of that process. So we hope that we can reduce that with this project. So still focusing on the problems, the lack of clarity and consistency ultimately reduces the transparency in the sector, and that makes funders nervous. One of the things they're especially nervous about is double funding fraud, where an NPO, a dishonest NPO, could report one set of costs to donor 1 and report the same costs to donor 2. So they're getting 2 lots of income for one set of costs. Now that's a type of fraud which is really difficult to spot when there's so much focus on project-based reporting and there isn't a strong linkage to the general purpose financial reports. And that is a type of fraud that donors are very concerned about. And that's part of the reason why they invest so much in due diligence and audits. So the solution that the IFR for NPO project is providing is internationally applicable guidance for how NPOs should prepare their annual general purpose financial reports. Now, just like IPSAS or IFRS, it would be up to a particular country to decide whether to adopt or align to this guidance, and whether certain NPOs within their jurisdiction should be required to adopt it or allowed to follow it. Ethiopia as a case in point, I know that the Ethiopia regulator a few years ago decided that NPOs should follow IPSAS because IFRS wasn't meeting their needs. So the regulator that made that decision would be the same regulator that could make the decision to move to this guidance if they wanted to, if they chose to. All we can do as a project is develop the guidance and make sure people know about it and that it meets people's needs. It's up to jurisdictions to decide whether they would like to adopt it or align to it. In some countries, there is not strong regulation or the ability to support NPOs to comply with the regulations that are there. And in that instance, I think funders can also have a strong influence. If funders recommend the guidance as best practice, they shouldn't require it if a country doesn't allow it. That just creates more problems. But if funders recognize it as best practice and encourage it where it is allowed, then that can also be a strong factor in NPOs around the world adopting the guidance. So the future outcomes and benefits are really wide-ranging. For NPOs applying the guidance, it means that they'll be better able to demonstrate their capacity and attract funds, as well as supporting the provision of decision-useful information for governance and management. So both internally and externally, it could support NPOs to get better quality financial information. For funders, it contributes to better and more efficient due diligence, and that's a win for NPOs too. And then having clear guidance simplifies and improves the value of audit assurance. If there's a very clear framework for auditors to audit against, it's much easier to organize an audit program, to train auditors, to have consistent, to learn how to do an NPO audit, and that each one is the same. Obviously the difference in NPOs, but you're the same accounting and financial reporting framework. So one of the other really important outcomes from this project, separate from the guidance itself, is the creation of a global community of stakeholders able to engage and collaborate to solve sector-wide issues. And that has never existed before. And that's part of the reason that we've never had this guidance before. Ultimately, we believe that the guidance will contribute to a more resilient and accountable sector that's better able to attract, generate, and utilize funds to achieve positive societal good. And that's what we all want. Who is behind this project? So it's being implemented by 2 organizations in partnership, Humentum and CIDFA. So Humentum is a global association that convenes NPO professionals and inspires sector-wide change. Some of you may have heard of Mango, that used to run training courses in Ethiopia, or Inside NGO. Mango and Inside NGO merged with Lingos as well to form Humentum in 2017. So we were born as a new organization in 2017, but we have 40 years of experience between us in the sector. The Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, UK-based professional accountancy organization. They have standard setting roles for local government and charities, but they also play an important role as an international convener on public sector accounting issues. And both Humentum and CIPFA are themselves NPOs. The chair of the IPSASB, of the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board, which is what's used in Ethiopia, the chair of IPSASB actually is employed by CIPFA and has been seconded to IPSASB for his chairing role. So CIPFA is very close to public sector accounting. So between us, the project partners, we are well connected to a range of stakeholders within the sector that are crucial to this project. So this really is a by the sector, for the sector initiative. As Humentum, we are close to non-profit organizations who we've been offering training services and consultancy services and free resources for many, many years in this area of financial management. And we also have very strong relations with a number of funders, particularly USAID and FCDO in the UK and the US, but also through a number of other collaborative projects that we've done over the years with other funders as well. Then CIPFA has this strong connection with standard setters internationally and the accounting and audit community specifically. So this really is a by the sector, for the sector initiative. Seed funding to enable the project to launch has been provided by the Open Society Foundations and the Ford Foundation, and we're very grateful to them. But the project is not fully funded, so we still have some way to go to get to the end of the project, but we will get there, I'm confident. So in addition to actually a small staff team from CIPFA and Humentum, there's 3 of us full-time and then 2 others that put in time as well. In addition to that small staff team, we have advisory groups who offer their perspective and experience on a voluntary basis. So the technical advisory group, which you can see on the left, comprises national accounting standard setters from 5 continents. So here, in terms of East Africa, in the top right there, we have Chris Twagirimana, who is from Rwanda, and he's representing the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of East Africa. I'm not 100% sure whether or not Ethiopia is part of that group, but maybe they are, I hope so. We also have, bottom right there is Tamba from Sierra Leone. So Sierra Leone actually has their own standard for non-profits, and Tamba is the standard setter in that country. And then the bottom left there, Lebogang, is with PAFA, the Pan-African Federation of Accountants. So from an African point of view, we have a really good, good representation on this technical advisory group. And each of those are actual standard setters. So they've got real technical expertise and experience in knowing how to write and develop a good, professional, easy to use standard. Then the practitioner advisory group, or the PAG, you can see on the right, this is made up of practitioners. So NPOs who prepare financial statements and different users like donors. We have some auditors and some academics specializing in non-profit accounting from all different parts of the world, as you can see. So when the standard setters prepare the guidance, the PAG are kind of giving it a reality check. Is this going to meet really meet our needs. And they're also helping us to get the word out around the world. Now, in these groups, we are proactively seeking to build and maintain diversity, and we have full transparency. So information about each member and the details of all the meetings can be found on the project website so that the process is fully transparent. So we've looked at why this project is important. We've clarified what we're actually going to achieve and who the project partners and stakeholders and advisors are. So now let's just take a look at how and when, by looking at the phases and the timelines for the project implementation. So the project is using a three-phase process, which is equivalent to all other standard setting processes. Phase 1 is the consultation phase, and the key output is a consultation paper, which presents questions for structured input from stakeholders. And we'll talk about this more later on after our small group discussion. The second phase is the development phase, where we analyze the feedback from the consultation and use that as an evidence base to develop draft guidance, which is then exposed for comment. And that is called an exposure draft, which we expect by mid-2023. And then the third phase takes stock of the feedback from that exposure draft and puts through changes before launching the final guidance, which is expected in early 2025. But developing the guidance itself, it might feel like the end from our project timeline, but it's actually the beginning. The benefits that we talked about earlier will only be felt when the guidance is widely adopted and used. So for countries that adopt it, there may be transition, there'll be training, there'll be a need to support NPOs and their auditors and the users in understanding the new guidance and the formats that produces in the financial statements. So that way, there are two key aspects to the IFR for NPO project design. One aspect is the technical rigor applied in the guidance development process, which is led by CIPFA. And then the other aspect is the stakeholder engagement, which is led by Humentum. That's actively reaching out to stakeholders all over the world. That's why we're having this meeting. We're reaching out to regulators, to national professional accountancy organizations, to donors and NPOs to participate in the development process so that once it's produced, they're already ready and hopefully willing to adopt it when it's done. So how are we doing in terms of outreach? We already have engagement from people all over the world. So the countries in blue on the map are those where individuals have signed up and registered their interest in this project. They include a really broad range of stakeholders, including both international and local NPOs, their auditors, accountancy bodies, regulators, donors, and others. So the yellow flags on the map are members of the technical advisory group, these accounting standard setting bodies, which you can see literally all 5 continents. The purple flags show the members of the practitioner advisory group. And the black flags show the various country champions like Meti. You can see Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda. We're quite well served in East Africa for country champions. And the country champions are working to engage stakeholders in their countries to ensure their voices are heard. So you can see we still have some gaps. We're looking to increase our presence and engagement in West Africa, in Latin America and Asia particularly. But we're working proactively and deliberately so that we get a really representative set of voices. Nobody is left out, and the guidance really will meet the needs as expressed by various stakeholders. So having heard that introduction about the project, now is a chance to meet some of the other here and share your questions and thoughts in some smaller groups. So we're going to be using this breakout feature. If you've used that before, basically you'll be sent to a small group with maybe I'm not sure how many, 5, 6, 7 people. And then when you get there, please can you turn on your video if possible, because it's much nicer to have a conversation with people you can see. Just greet each other, find out who else is in your room, and then just share any reactions or comments to the presentation that you've heard so far. And what questions does it bring up for you? It'd be good then to think about what benefits can you foresee for stakeholders in Ethiopia once this guidance is in place and is used. Can you foresee benefits? And what challenges can you also foresee? And if you can see challenges, are there any solutions that you've got as well? Because we really—
Sorry, Sam, sorry, I have to interrupt you. The slide is not moving.
The slide is not moving. You see small groups, 2 minutes?
No. It has just stuck on advisory groups.
Oh, I wonder why. Now can you see how and when?
Not yet, Sam.
Thank you for telling me. Let me see if I can fix that.
Even it's too late, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Now can you see? What can you see now? How and when?
No, from my side, maybe from other participants, if they can see.
Let me just stop sharing and then I'll reshare.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry about that. Letting me know. Let's try again. Share. Oh, no. Let me just pause recording first. Welcome back. I hope you had a nice time chatting in those groups. And we'd love to hear back from you. I just want to make sure you're all able to speak. If you want to unmute, I hope you can. I'm just looking at ask all you should all have the option to unmute if you'd like to speak. So would anybody from one of the groups like to share some of their reactions or comments with the wider group? Was there any spokesperson nominated?
I can do that, Samantha.
Thank
Eric,
you, please.
yeah, unless Eric and Yodit, you want to?
No, I think it's okay from my end, but we'll pitch in if there is anything.
Yeah, maybe Eric, you can summarize.
Yodit, you can proceed, then I'll probably chip in if there's something.
Okay.
Okay.
So basically, Samantha, I think there were like 4 points raised in our discussion. It was a good thing that this topic has been raised, and that NGOs will finally get their own standards for the many reasons that you have mentioned in the opening of the meeting. One of the 3 things that were raised is, number 1, the convergence with other standards, with IFRS and IPSAS. Is it going to be like a whole different set of standards, or is it going to be like a little bit of both the international standards that we know? And the second one was like, what about the big NGOs? Was there going to be that we think there's going to be resistance from the major donors? Because, for example, if we take the example of Ethiopia, USAID require all their subsidiaries, their donor and the smaller donor NGOs to report according to US GAAP for convergence, for consolidation purposes. So, and many of our NGOs are funded by USAID here in Ethiopia. So what's their take? Like, it obviously depends on jurisdictions, but what are the major players saying in regards to the new standards being discussed? And the other thing is capacity and cost in trying to train accountants and auditors to the new standards. Is that going to be an issue in many jurisdictions? And Another one is in terms of regulations, the countries that have perhaps regulatory bodies will be easier to enforce rather than some of the countries like South Sudan that might not have regulatory bodies will be difficult to enforce in terms of in light of the government. I think these are the issues we talked about, Samantha.
Thank you so much. Those are fantastically pertinent issues that you've raised, all of them. So the first one, I didn't write them down, sorry, so remind me if I forget one. But the first one, what's this actually going to look like? So there is a proposal that is set out in the consultation paper that will be issued on the 28th of January. So we are presenting a proposal for how to do it, but we're looking for feedback. The proposal is to base it on IFRS for SME, because IFRS for SME is so small, therefore much easier to digest than full IFRS or full IPSAS. The problem, of course, with IFRS and IFRS for SME, it's written for a for-profit context. And IPSAS is actually much closer in terms of handling the types of transactions, non-exchange transactions and things like that. So what we feel as the advisory groups, that in an ideal world, if there were such a thing as IPSAS for SMEs, if there were a mini IPSAS or IPSAS light, that would be our ideal starting point, but it doesn't exist. So chapter 4 of the consultation paper sets out the criteria that we chose in trying to select the best basis. And there's room for comments and feedback on that. And then we're proposing to base it on IFRS for SME, but we will absolutely, to fill the gaps where IFRS for SME doesn't give guidance, gifts in kind and grant income recognition and things like that, we'll definitely be picking from IPSAS or from full IFRS or from national non-profit standards where they exist. You don't need to reinvent any wheels. It's kind of picking all the tools that already exist in different places, in different countries, and different standards, and pulling them together into one easy to use, one-stop shop booklet, sort of, you know, that sort of size rather than this sort of size. Sort of size. That's the idea, that's the proposal, and we're looking for feedback on that. The second, one of your other questions was about the donors. So absolutely, this is a big issue. So yeah, just last night at 11 p.m., 12 hours ago, I was in a meeting with stakeholders in the US. We had an equivalent meeting like this. Now, one of the members on the practitioner advisory group it works for USAID, and she is the senior advisor to the CFO of USAID. So they are stopping short of a formal endorsement, but they're certainly watching this project very closely, and they have a seat on the practitioner advisory group. One of the things that Dorothea said in her presentation yesterday was, we need to be clear about the distinction between donor reports. The reports that go to USAID are the reports about the award. The reports that go to donors are what money have I received from this donor and what have I spent on this project and what have we done on this project. They're project specific and donor specific. This guidance will have no impact on that. So USAID's rules on how you prepare your fund accountability statement, or ECHO's rules on how you prepare the donor report for them, will not change because of this project. So I want to be really, really crystal clear on that, so we manage expectations. However, donors are watching this very closely and are interested. So USAID, the rules that they have for what organizations should use for their entity-wide financial statements are very flexible. And Dorothea said this yesterday in her presentation. As USAID, if they are presenting general purpose financial statements, it says you can follow whichever GAAP is appropriate in your context. You don't have to follow US GAAP, which is for US-based non-profit organizations. You don't have to follow that for your own annual audited. You can use IPSAS, you can use IFRS, you can use whatever is appropriate and whatever your regulator says. So the donors in general, where we're engaging with them, are supportive of the project in as much as it will influence the year-end general purpose financial statements. What we're to do, and I won't pretend this isn't a small challenge, and I won't pretend that we're there yet. We're hoping to work with donors to feed back some of this messaging that we're getting all over the world, that the donor, our own financial accounting is driven by the needs of our donor requirements. You know, we set up our ledgers, we do accounting policies to meet our donor reporting requirements, and how that's having an impact. So we want to feed that back to donors and get their support and collaboration in working to harmonize donor reporting formats as well over time. So if you can imagine a future where there's one harmonized format for donor reports and one harmonized format for year-end annual accounts. They would still be different from each other, but if there's only two things, it's easier then to get training and integration and everything else, rather than a million donor formats and lots of different year-end formats. At the moment, we just have too much complexity. So Hikmet, I hope that speaks to that question, but it's a complicated one. You talked about transition and training, absolutely. So there's some things that the project can do, and there's some things that the project can't do. So as a project, we are planning to prepare training materials, the online training resources made freely available, in English at least, to support that transition and training process. However, it will certainly need effort, coordination at national level in every country that chooses to adopt it. And that's part of the reason why we want to start now, so that countries can plan and plan ahead. If they know guidance is ready in 2025 and they're going to ask NPOs to adopt it by 2027 or something, you've got that time, that window to build in. If you need resources, there's time for grant funding or apply to government, etc. I'm not saying it's easy, but it will. There's a mixture of what the project can do. Countries will need to do themselves. I've forgotten the fourth point. I'm so sorry. I should have written it down. Was there another one that you wanted me to comment on?
One about regulation, but I guess that's jurisdiction based, right? It's easier if there's a regulator and more difficult if there isn't.
That's absolutely right. So as you said, countries like South Sudan, Congo, their number, where even Georgia, where Georgia has its own non-profit standard, but it's not enforced. So they've gone to all the effort of writing it, but the compliance is zero because there's no actual body to enforce it. So in those situations, I think donors have a more big influence on reporting practice than the regulators. So that's why we want to be able to recommend it as best practice and really drive that application. But you're quite right. Fortunately, you don't have that in Ethiopia. You have quite a strong regulatory environment, which is excellent. So thank you so much for those. Is there other comments from the other group or other questions, benefits, challenges? Who else would like to share?
Okay, maybe Ibrahim. So we have to welcome Ibrahim from Sudan, who has joined us, and I want to thank him very much for joining. And he's the one to feedback on the second group, I think, or the first group, our group.
Hi, Ibrahim. You're welcome.
Hi, Sam. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
You too.
I will start with what we discuss in our group, and I think others can remind me. So the first question that we are asking about the capacity building and trainings after this these standards introduce and get ready. Who is going to take care about the about the trainings and about the capacity building for NGOs. And also, I think we discussed the experience in Ethiopia, in Sudan, and in Ethiopia, like there's IPSAS, but it still is not that much NPO standards. And also in Sudan, there is no standard at all. So there is like a framework from the High Commission of Humanitarian Work. So like there is a standard on what type of financial statements required, but there is no like standard. So there is different NGOs using different standards, different templates and so on. So Mitty and others can add what I already.
Yeah. So just to add on what you said about the training. So there's from the project providing some training materials, just like IFRS, any consultant or trainer, once the guidance is set, anybody can then develop training programs and offer those training services on a professional basis in a context. So it will kind of create a market, I think, for new training, which is obviously a hump that you've got to get over. It will be a period of transition, which will have cost and difficulty. And then once we've got over it and people are using it, it will be easier. It's taken years, decades actually, for IPSAS and IFRS to get wider. We're hoping to do it much, much more quickly in this sector because there is a lot of appetite and there's a lot of desire for it. We're seeing in different countries, but it's not a small challenge. It's a very significant one indeed. Yeah, it's great to know that Sudan as well are engaged and interested in moving forward. There's a question here from Daniel. In Ethiopia has been adopting IPSAS as per the roadmap. How does IFR for MPO fit in? So I hope this is maybe been made ready, but the idea would be that if the Ethiopia regulator chose, and it's a big decision, so having just moved to IPSAS, and I know that so many MPOs have just been going through the headache of transition and have just invested so much money in transition. So it would be no small decision. And you'd need to weigh the pros and cons of deciding, should we change quickly and just have a small period when we've been with IPSAS? Should we just let it settle for 10 years or 5 years and just give people a break from change and then adopt it later, see what other countries do? There's no one answer, and every country will have to make its own decisions around that. Obviously, the real benefits are felt when more and more countries and more MPOs are using it. So our hope as a project is that everybody would use it as quickly as possible. But obviously, there's different realities and factors at play, which we completely understand, of course. So I think if it's all right, Meti, I'll move on to the second half of the presentation. There's more chance for comments and questions. I'd love to, and you can also put in the chat. So if you talked about other benefits, your own reactions and comments, it'd be lovely to see those in the chat as well, because we use these comments and this feedback when we're speaking back to other stakeholders. So it'd be just lovely to get a sense of, is this something that you would welcome? Is this a good initiative? Is this something that nice in theory, but too impossible? What are your reactions and thoughts? We'd love to hear those in the chat. So meanwhile, let me move on to the next part of the presentation. If I can get this right, hopefully. Oops. Right. Hopefully you're seeing, are you seeing that? Are you seeing my slide, Meti, about the consultation process?
Yes, Sam. So I just want an idea. We may have to put a remark for Ms. Hikmet and her team, maybe to think over the issue of adopting IPSAS or waiting for this reporting standard, maybe if they have to think over, just to put a remark.
Brilliant, thank you, Meti. We'll look forward to that at the end. So let me share with you about the consultation process. So this is the sort of next chunk of our meeting, another sort of 20 minutes I want to present to you about how this will work. So the consultation paper will be launched on the 28th of January, 2021. So we want to take a look at who should participate and why. What does the consultation process look like? What is in this consultation paper? And how practically should people respond? So in terms of, are you seeing my slide move, Meti? Are you seeing who and why?
Yes, yes, Sam, go ahead.
Great. So everyone here is invited to participate. We're particularly interested to hear the views of regulators, obviously, because you have the authority to decide whether to adopt or align to the guidance. So if there's something that would make it easier or harder to actually adopt it, we would love to hear that, because we want more and more countries to be, for it to be relevant and meaningful. Auditors, especially auditors of entity level financial statements, because you see the issues that crop up in client after client. Funders, because, as we mentioned, funders are users of these general purpose financial statements. If their needs can be better met in the year-end accounts, perhaps there will be less need for more and more duplicative other types of reporting and auditing. And then obviously NPOs as preparers, so the senior staff and treasurers, would be great for you to engage, as well as consultants and trainers who are close to these issues. So why? If we don't have input from Ethiopia and Sudan and other countries in the room, that cultural context, that national level context might not be reflected. And that's really important, which means that, you know, the needs and realities of different stakeholders in Ethiopia might not be reflected in the proposals that we put forward in the exposure draft. And what we really have here is an opportunity to shape the future, and future generations of Ethiopians can look back and thank you for participating in creating something that's fit for purpose, something that really does work. At the moment, nothing that we have quite works, but this can be an opportunity to create the future that we want for our sector. And then the last reason is actually about the project itself and building credibility for the project and for the guidance. If we get 1,000 responses from 150 countries and we get input and feedback into what people want, this gives a really strong evidence base for the drafting. And it brings credibility to the project, which means we can raise funds to complete it, and it means that more people will adopt it. So the quality and quantity of input in this consultation process is really vital to the project's overall success. So I hope that reasons for you to participate. So we have a consultation paper. It's still in the very final stages of development. It's around 200 pages. So we want to make sure you kind of understand how it's structured. So I've got a frog in my throat. So after the executive summary, there's an introduction which sets out the objectives of the project, explains who should respond to the consultation paper and how, and it's really short, essential reading. Then the bulk of the paper and all the questions that we're looking for your feedback on are in two main sections, part 1 and part 2. And we're going to look at those more deeply in a minute. And then some supplementary information gives more context about the project. It has annexes that show how each of the current standards and national standards treats different issues. So lots and lots of technical information to refer to for those that want to. And then the glossary explains the meaning of different words as intended in the consultation paper. So sometimes the same words has different meanings in different countries, or obviously people aren't using English as their first language. So the glossary is really there just to get a common understanding of the way we have meant a certain term in the consultation paper, It's not changing the meaning globally. It's just to help the understanding and the readability of the consultation paper. So let's take a bit of a deeper dive into these parts 1 and 2, the main meat of the paper. So part 1 is about framework level issues, like how to describe what a non-profit organization is. Which types of organizations do we mean exactly? Who are their stakeholders? That kind of overview level question. It's written in plain English, and it's pitched to be accessible to a broad audience of stakeholders interested in financial reporting, not just accountants. Each chapter presents a proposal and ends with a request for general matters for comment. That's, you're invited to comment on the general level matters presented in the chapter. So GMCs are these general matters for comment. The questions generally form, do you agree with what we've proposed? If not, why not? So in that sense, the question is open. There's room for you to share all your opinions, but it's very structured. You need to have read the chapter in order to submit a comment on it. So then for part 2, this is about specific accounting issues, like when to recognize grant income or whether to disclose gifts in kind, how to measure inventory that doesn't have a sale value. It's also written in plain English, and it's pitched to be accessible to a more technical audience, familiar with accounting concepts and language. So you don't need to be, super technical, but certainly have familiarity with accounting concepts. So in part 2, each section describes the issue. There are 10 issues altogether. It describes the issues and then presents some alternative treatments. And then each section ends with a request for specific matters for comment, SNCs. So you're invited to comment on the specific matters presented in the section. And generally the questions take the form, do you agree with the description and the alternatives presented? Have we framed this? Have we understood it in the way that you understand it? Have we recognized all the different issues associated with this accounting problem? If not, and then do you agree with the description and the alternatives presented? If not, why not? Which alternative would you prefer and why? So again, it's necessary to read the section of alternatives before you can meaningfully submit a response. But what that does is it gives the project really structured responses that can be analysed, and they can be analysed by country and region stakeholder type, so that we really understand where some of the difficulties or differences of opinion would be. So that's the sort of overall general shape of parts 1 and part 2. So let's just do a bit of a deeper dive. I should say, clarify that the, I think it says there at the bottom, consultation paper under construction. What I'm sharing is the final draft that we have at the moment. There may be final changes before publication, in which case I apologize. And it's the final version that's published that will obviously be the right one, but we wanted to share in advance to give people a taster. So part 1, chapter 1 of the consultation paper is all about which organizations would be considered NPOs for the purpose of this guidance. And the chapter proposes some broad characteristics. For example, that any surplus generated by the activities of the organization are fed back into the missional activities rather than being distributed to owners or members. So that would be one of the characteristics of a non-profit organization. And there are 4 altogether in the section. So the question is, do you agree with these broad characteristics? If you think about applying that in your own context, would it be clear? Would it be easy for you, for regulators to decide which organizations should adopt it or not? If not, why not? What else would you present? So that's the whole of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of part 1 is all about the external stakeholders, the users of these NPO financial reports. Who are they and what are their main information needs? So we've proposed here that they require information on the NPO's achievement of objectives, economy and efficiency, compliance with regulations and restrictions, and longer term financial health. So do you agree? Got the right things here? Are there other things that users really want to look at? Are there things in there that aren't relevant? We want to hear as a user of financial statements, is this going to meet your main information needs? And users includes management and a board, by the way, as well. So it's all readers of the financial statements. Then part 3 of the consultation paper is about aspects of the guidance itself. It presents some proposals, and one of the questions is about accrual-based guidance. So we make the case in chapter 3 that we believe accrual-based guidance is going to be the most effective and meaningful way to get good quality financial statements. But we do acknowledge there are challenges. So the question here is indicate what challenges, if any, do you foresee if the guidance is accrual-based? What other approaches might meet the objectives of the guidance? So again, that's really seeking feedback on the accrual base and also the inclusion of narrative reporting in the scope of the project. So part 1, chapter 4, is all about existing financial frameworks. And as I mentioned earlier, firstly, it makes the case that the IFR for NPO guidance must draw on some existing frameworks. So we can't start with a blank sheet of paper, both because of time and cost, but also consistency and interlinkage with the rest of the profession. So then it sets out criteria for evaluating the usefulness of existing frameworks for this project and assesses the existing frameworks against those criteria. There are 3 questions in this chapter, but one of them is, do you agree with the criteria that have been used to assess the suitability of the frameworks? If not, why not? What other criteria do you believe could be used? And then obviously, do you agree with the scoring, the assessment, the process that we've gone through to assess the frameworks? Then chapter 5 is like where all the other chapters are leading to in a way. And it puts forward this proposal that we base the model on IFRS for SME as a foundational framework, but then draw on full IFRS, IPSAS, and jurisdiction level standards to develop the guidance. So one of the key questions is, do you agree with this model? Do you have any concerns about using IFRS for SME as a foundation? What are they? We just want to get reactions and feedback to that as a starting point, because without that, it's very difficult for the team to start drafting. Kind of need to have some consensus around that as the least worst starting point, given the options available. So that's a snapshot of the consultation paper. Part 1 has 5 chapters with 2 to 4 questions per chapter. And I hope you have strong opinions about some of those questions, which is great. We'd love to hear them. So as you can see, in each case, you need to carefully read the relevant chapter and then give a comment or response to it, which enables us to have that structured but rich feedback. So let's take a look at part 2. Part 2, which is the more detailed accounting issues now. So again, these are the issues in the final draft where we are at the moment, subject to final changes. So we can see the types of issues. We've got 10, I don't know, there are 10 in the paper. I think I've listed 9 here. But things like how should the financial statements be presented? In some countries, they have different columns for different funds. Is that the right way to do it? What vertical or horizontal balance sheets? Do we want the comprehensive retained income together with the income statement. There are lots of options that are followed in different countries. What would be their preferences? What should be included in the narrative reports that accompany those financial statements? How can we best create consistency for MPOs to demonstrate their impact and tell their story and maximize the linkage to the financials? And also what aspects of governance and other transparency aspects should be included in the narrative financial reports. Then how should expenses be classified? In a company, you've got your revenue, cost of sales, gross profit, admin, marketing. You've got those sort of headlines so that you can get the whole thing on one page. What's the best way to summarize the top level expenses in a consistent manner? Should it be by function, by nature, and how? This obviously has a big interlinkage with donor reporting formats. So if donor reporting formats can follow a similar or consistent expenditure classification framework as your annual audited accounts, wow, wouldn't that make life easier? You could do so much more with simpler accounting packages. At the moment, if you're small and you don't have, one of the bigger accounting packages that can handle multiple coding options, so you can code by salaries and by projects and by, this particular donor budget line and whatever, it's really hard to do that coding. So it would be really interesting to see what is the best and neatest way to summarize those expenses into different categories. And then the big one, how should income be recognized and measured? Especially income from grants, income with restrictions or stipulations or conditions, each of which are slightly different. When do we defer when do we defer income? We've got it, but we can't recognize it yet. Can we recognize income that we have a contract for, but it's not in our bank account yet? And there's so many different ways that that's done around the world. And income is one of the biggest numbers on the financial statements. It's one of the most easy proxies for size. And yet there's literally no consistency in the way it's accounted for. So we can see that the answers to these questions aren't obvious. So NPOs in countries without guidance have to make up their own answers on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes it will depend on which finance director you have in post or what your auditor happens to think. So that's why we get so much variety and inconsistency, because the answers aren't very obvious. So you can see that each of these issues is more technical, but we won't go through them in detail now. But the principle is that in each section, it presents some information about the issue and asks, do you agree with this analysis? Have we understood this well? And then it offers alternatives and invites you to state which alternative you would prefer and why. So we do plan to hold webinars on each of these topics next year, and we're already in the process of preparing some videos, some explainer videos, so that you feel you can access that. I'll just do the next slide and then I'll move to some of the questions in the chat. So the consultation paper will be launched on the 28th of January. Hopefully by now, what you've heard, you're thinking, yes, I want to participate. So all you need to know is how to do it. So 28th of January, it will be open until the 30th of July for part 1 and the 24th of September for part 2. So acknowledging that part 1 is shorter and easier, and we can start analysing the responses to part 1, even if some people need a bit longer to respond to part 2. There'll be a lot of detailed information shared through the website and on social media about how to respond to the launch. But the main method will basically be through the website. We think at the moment you could do a letter, you can do a Word template or a survey. There'll be different options. You don't have to answer everything. We're trying to make it as user-friendly as possible. You can just answer the bits that are relevant to you, that you have an opinion on. Then we're also looking at regional level roundtables. It'll be sort of 4-hour event There'll be one for East Africa, we hope. And the idea is that it would probably be an invitation, primarily an invitation event, sort of 60 people per region, getting some of the most influential stakeholders around the table with a nice mix to have a more conversational feedback process that complements the structured written comments that people submit. So that's how that will work next year. So my number one take-home message, the single thing I want you to go away with more than anything else, is to please contribute to this consultation. Take the opportunity, use your voice to shape the future, and be part of that process. So I'll hand back to Meti to manage the questions. I can see a couple of questions in the chat. Shall we start with those, Meti, and then open it up?
Yes, we can start with that one. Like, for example, there are questions under the chat box.
Yes,
you
I can
just
see
read
that.
them.
So Daniel Habtima, if I've said that right, says NGOs in Ethiopia have invested significant resources in adopting IPSAS. And for some, it's still a work in progress. What is Abe's assessment of cost-benefit analysis in taking this new initiative for the financial reporting standards? So Abe, we're putting Abe on the spot here. I don't know if you feel able to share a reflection without consultation, but would you like to take the floor?
Thank you, Samantha. Yes, obviously, this will be my personal view, but it's something that we've been thinking about for quite some time, especially since I came on board, which is a year now. The IPSAS implementation for NGOs has only been 3 years, and it hasn't been very successful. David, I think if you need some statistics, I can give it to you. Daniel, I mean, we have a record that we were expecting 2,430 NGOs to have adopted IPSAS by now. Since then, the roadmap that was the first roadmap that was implemented is now over. And by last month, we expected over 2,000 NGOs to have implemented IPSAS. But unfortunately, we have only 5% of those that have reported according to IPSAS. So what that technically means is that those that have converted are those that are able to do so. And I stand corrected, Daniel, but obviously, you know, the issue of capacity in our country, you know, the issue of perhaps compliance and many things, because many of these NGOs are pretty small. So the issue of cost benefits, even in adopting IPSAS, I don't think has been clearly thought through. So the new roadmap that was issued 2 months ago stipulates that perhaps we gave time for these NGOs to adopt IPSAS again by 2023, but the internal ABEMA staff and as well as board of directors said that perhaps if we should be open to adopting other standards if and when they should come. Somehow I was aware of this initiative in the past, so it's already been proposed to the board of directors that perhaps even beyond 2023, it's something we should look at. So obviously there's going to be a lot of consultation and you know, an impact and assessment in those that have adopted IPSAS so far, and those that have not, perhaps we give them further, extend to 2025 or even further, perhaps to look at the new standards. But this is all off the cuff, and obviously I need more consultation with the relevant people.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. So important to hear that perspective. Daniel's other question is about IFAC. Is there any consultation or coordination with the International Federation of Accountants, which is support the development, adoption and implementation of IPSAS and IFRS? So let me say that on the tag, on the technical advisory group, which is national standard setters, we have an official observer from the IFRS. So they know about the project, they are they recognize the need for a sector-specific standard. It was even put to the IFRS board and the IPSAS board, IASB and IPSASB. It was put to their members a few years ago. The case was made based on the survey done in 2015. And both those boards acknowledged that there was a need, but they both said, we don't have the mandate, we don't have the resources. So they're watching what this project is doing very carefully. And our hope, our dream, and this is definitely in the bag, but our hope is that by the end of it, one of those bodies might take on the guidance and own it for a sustainable future for the guidance. If we just develop it once and then it doesn't move with time, that also won't be great in the long term. But at the moment, it's early days. So let me say they certainly know about it. They're certainly not opposed to it. They are not at the stage where they're endorsing it. But if we use IFRS for SME as a basis, we would need to get copyright permissions from IASB. So it's they certainly know all about it. They're very closely involved. Let me say that. In terms of IPSAS, I mentioned that the chair of IPSASB, who works for SIPFA, he is also the chair of the technical advisory group for this project. So it's two very different roles, and he's very independent and very careful to state that his role on this project is not the same, obviously, as his role, but it is the same person. And the IPSASB are also very closely watching and know about this project. So it's certainly not happening separate from them, but they are very clear that they don't have the mandate or the resources to drive this project themselves. In terms of IFAC, again, they are aware, and we're hoping that they will be sharing information about the consultation paper, for example, with their members in a communication, encouraging their members to contribute. But again, it's very early days. There's nothing like an official endorsement or anything that strong, but it's certainly something that they know about and are not against, let me put it that way. So there's coordination and collaboration, not strong endorsement. I hope that's fair to say. So that's very important questions. And if we were going ahead without their knowledge, without their blessing, or with their specific, if they were against it, it wouldn't get off the ground. And it's the very fact that they are engaging with the project in that way that enables us to even consider going forward. So yeah, absolutely crucial to have their blessing moving forward. Other questions? Are there other questions and comments, maybe about the consultation process or anything else? You could just unmute or type it in the chat, really. I've just clicked something to allow people to unmute themselves. Okay. So Meti, do you want to go to the final slides, and then if there are any other comments, we can address them later or in
so before we're moving up to the next slide, Daniel just left the meeting, and he noted we send him the answers for the questions, maybe through email or through other media. Thank you. So we can move to the next slide.
Are you seeing that, Meti? Community forums?
Yes.
Okay, so before we finish, we'd like to tell you about our online forum for the IFR for NPO community. And this really is the perfect place to ask questions, discuss your thoughts, and meet other people in the community globally. From the IFR for NPO website, you click forum at the top right and follow the instructions to create your account and get posting. It's a bit like sort of Facebook or LinkedIn, but specifically for this community. It's quite a niche conversation. I have to tell you that the forum is temporarily out of action until next week, but you can register now and then wait to start posting, and we'll email you when it's up and working again. So other ways that you can stay engaged, please do.
Next steps.
Oh,
please do subscribe.
Got a recording of myself speaking in the corner as well. Please do visit the website, and which is ifr4mpo.org, and do subscribe to the newsletter. It's only every 2 or 3 months. It's not going to fill your inbox with clutter, but it just means you will keep up to date with how things are moving. You'll get invited to events. You'll know when the consultation process is open and things like that. And then please also follow the project on social media, LinkedIn and Twitter. And obviously, the more you can share those posts and share within your networks, it will really, really help us. If you work in an MPO and you have a head office, can you tell your head office finance person or the grants officers about it? If you work for an audit firm and you're part of an international network, can you tell your head office to share in the wider network internationally? If you are part of other networks of people interested in this topic, please share so that we can get as many voices and make sure people know about it as much as possible. So after this meeting, we'll share an email. You'll receive an email that will have an evaluation, a very short evaluation, I think 2 questions, a link to the deck and a link to the recording. And we'll also put in the email some of the questions and answers and comments that you have put together and next steps for Ethiopia. So with that, let me say thank you so much to Meti and others. Thank you. We wonderful having Meti as the project country champion, and we're so grateful for her support and help. And thank you for all of you for participating. Meti, do you want to say a final word?
No, thank you. Thank you so much for all others who have participated and keep on going with us and support the idea. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.